Palmyra, a tropical island in the South Seas. For most of the year, it's uninhabited. But by strange coincidence, in June of 1974, 6 sailboats all converged on this tiny island. It should have been Shangri-La, but when bad blood developed, piracy took over, and the only law was the law of the jungle.
A small, uninhabited island almost 1,000 miles from nowhere. It's hard to believe such a paradise really exists. For most sailors on the South Pacific, Palmyra is a stop on the way to somewhere else. But for a few, it's a destination of its own, a place to disappear from the world. That's just what happened to Mac and Muff Graham, although it wasn't their intention. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. Crime on the high seas falls under the jurisdiction of the FBI. The disappearance of the Grahams and their yacht suggested trouble in paradise. The problem was, there was not a shred of evidence to prove it.
Palmyra Atoll is a series of small islands in the South Pacific, formed by a coral reef which surrounds a lagoon. It is owned by the United States, and during World War II, it housed a U.S. Navy base. The remains of the deserted base are still on the island today. It is located approximately 1,000 miles from Hawaii and is a stopover point for sailors and yachtsmen on their way to Samoa. Oftentimes, large, beautiful sailboats can be seen at the broken-down docks in its lagoon. But on June 26, 1974, a small sailboat named the Iola made its way past the docks and into Palmyra's makeshift harbor. She had just completed a difficult 19-day journey from Hawaii, carrying a crew of 2. The boat was not suitable for the trip, and now limped into the lagoon, barely seaworthy. The ship's motor had frozen up about halfway to Palmyra. Before leaving Hawaii, the owners had repaired the Iola, which was a wooden boat, by covering it with a coat of fiberglass. The friction created by these 2 materials caused a crack to form in the hull. On the way to Palmyra, the Iola had begun to take on water. They had little money and very few provisions. Their plan was to live off the fruits of the island until later in the year. They had made a deal with some friends to bring supplies to the island, which they would exchange for a crop of marijuana they intended to grow. When they arrived at Palmyra, they were unhappy to see a handful of visitors at the dock area. They had hoped they would have the island to themselves. When they came ashore, they were greeted by a welcoming committee. It wasn't at all what they had expected. They introduced themselves as Stephanie Stearns and Roy Allen, even though the name Buck was tattooed on his right arm in plain view.
What's your name, I'm saying? Roy Allen. Roy? Yeah. Roy, you got Buck on your the side there.
When one of the yachtsmen commented on it, Stephanie claimed that Buck was his nickname. Something about Roy was different from the other yachters. He seemed rougher, perhaps even a little dangerous. Shortly after Roy and Stephanie arrived, another boat appeared in the channel, a beautiful 38-foot ketch called the Sea Wind. It wasn't long before the new arrivals made their way over to the dock. Mac Graham was 53 years old. His wife, Eleanor, nicknamed Muff, was a few years younger.
Hey, Evelyn, Mac. Good to see you. My wife, Muff.
Muff. Hi, Evelyn.
Like Roy, they were surprised to find so many people on what was supposed to be an uninhabited island where they planned to spend the better part of a year.
Hi, Stephanie. I'm Mac. Yeah? Hey, Mac, you got any cigarettes? Sure.
When Roy noticed Mac was a smoker, he asked for a cigarette and took most of the pack. This gesture would be considered impolite anywhere, but on an island, it was particularly so as supplies are limited and can't easily be replaced. For Mac and the others, this was their first insight into the kind of person Roy Allen might be. Roy also boasted about his plans to raise marijuana and trade it for supplies. Soon, everyone began settling into their new life in paradise. Muff Graham began to explore the island, the ruins of the Navy base and the sandy shores.
CQ, CQDX.
And he also made sure to keep in touch with the outside world by shortwave radio.
Everything's fine out here.
At regularly scheduled times, Mac would contact his friend Kurt Shoemaker in Hawaii and tell him about his latest discoveries.
Here's KH6IHG, Hawaii Island, calling and listening. He's just like, Tom Sawyer out in the, on the Mississippi or something. And so he would explain what he did each day. He'd go on excursions, just him, with his machete through the jungle and exploring all the things down there.
For Roy and Stephanie, on the other hand, things weren't going quite as well. Roy found the island was not well suited for growing marijuana. Living aboard the Iola was difficult. The boat was small, damp, cluttered, and cramped. Their supplies were all but gone, and they began to barter their possessions with the owners of the other boats for food and supplies. To the Grahams and the others, Roy and Stephanie were a nuisance. They were not properly supplied to be out on the high seas this far from civilization. The other yachters had enough supplies for themselves, with some extra for emergencies, but not enough to supply Roy and Stephanie. The Grahams were known for their hospitality. They had invited the other visitors to Palmyra aboard the Sea Wind. Others warned them not to allow Roy and Stephanie on their boat. But Mac wanted to make an attempt at being cordial. On July 5th, 2 weeks after the Grahams arrived, and long after everyone else on the island had already had the tour of the Sea Wind, Roy and Stephanie received an invitation to visit. They eagerly accepted.
Oh, the Sea Wind was a real yacht. It was a beautiful-looking boat to begin with, and nice lines. And Mac had kept it in just perfect shape.
It's gorgeous, huh? That's the
The Sea Wind was everything the Iola was not. It had a fully stocked larder, and it was equipped with every high-tech navigational device on the market. It had plenty of room, and the Sea Wind had sailed around the world. Stephanie commented on its size and human comforts. She was enchanted by the big bunk in the forward cabin. Roy remained sullen. When Roy began to find the cramped quarters and damp bedding of the Iola too confining, he decided to move into a makeshift tent on the beach. Stephanie would stay aboard the boat. By now, Roy and Stephanie had bartered most of their possessions with the other yachters for food and supplies. Other than trading or flat-out begging, they had little to do with the others. The situation was getting worse by the day. Most of the marijuana seedlings they had counted on for money had been eaten by insects. Although Palmyra has abundant natural resources, including fish, crabs, bird eggs, and coconuts, Roy had little knowledge of how to survive off the land. To catch fish, he would shoot them with his .22 caliber revolver. Like clockwork, Mac continued his weekly radio conversations with Kurt, and he kept him informed about Roy and Stephanie.
Okay.
It had moved way down the end of the lagoon and would have nothing to do with the other group. And bizarre things like they started planting marijuana again to see if they could grow it. He needed, I think they were running low on food, so he needed coconuts. He took a chainsaw and cut a coconut tree down to get to the coconuts. That's kind of stupid.
It also infuriated Mac Graham. Mac loved the island and had no tolerance for Roy's destructive
What's your
ways.
problem? You don't have to do that to get one of these. Why don't you just climb up and get it down?
One day he confronted Roy about it.
I didn't ask you for
Roy
your opinion
quickly
anyway.
became angry and told Mac to mind his own business. The hostility between them was building. On July 13th, Muff Graham wrote her mother a letter. She hadn't been enthusiastic about living on an island in the first place, and having Roy and Stephanie there only added to her misgivings. Dearest Mother, 3 boats are here now, but one is leaving and will take this letter with them. That leaves us alone with the hippie couple who plan to stay here and live off the land. It's just our luck they decided to roost in Palmyra. Roy and Stephanie have run out of sugar, cigarettes, and I don't know what. They've bartered with other boats. Next, they will ask us. Muff sent the letter back to civilization with Bernard and Evelyn Leonard, who were leaving Palmyra after a brief stay. The Grahams had previously made arrangements to receive letters over the radio from Kurt Shoemaker, who read them to Mac during their regular weekly shortwave contacts.
During that period of time, I was receiving mail from both of their mothers, his mother and hers. And then I would read this to them. Well, as one of the boats down there would leave, they would take the mail with them and eventually mail it when back in Honolulu or wherever. So there was communication going back and forth. And an interesting thing about it is one of the letters I read, the mother, and I think she was in her 80s, she says that she was afraid for them. She says, you should leave that place, something will happen to you.
One day when Mac was talking to Kurt, he told him that Roy had sent a message with one of the yachts back to his friends in Hawaii. They were supposed to bring Roy and Stephanie's supplies to Palmyra, and he told his friends to reply through Kurt's shortwave radio. Mac asked him if he had heard any news from them, but Kurt had heard nothing. And when Mac talked to him about Roy and Stephanie, there was something about their description that worried him.
And in between these conversations, he had occasionally mentioned the other boat. And I told him, I said, you know, that doesn't sound too good to these people. I said, you know, you better be careful. And he said, well, no, I can take care of myself. I'll be all right. And, so I said, well, I don't know. I think you ought to get out of there myself, or one of you ought to leave.
My fault?
I don't want to hear it.
No, I don't care.
Roy and Stephanie's tempers
I
were
live in a
running
dump,
short.
that's why. Look around you.
During the first weeks of August, the sound of angry voices could frequently be heard across the lagoon. The other visitors to the island saw Roy as a violent and quick-tempered man who was dangerous and should be avoided. Then, midway through August, another boat came to Palmyra and spent a few days. Norman Sanders and Thomas Wolfe were on their way to Samoa. The night before they were set to leave, they had cocktails with Mac and Muff. The talk turned to the Iola. Sanders was a sailing expert. He told them he had offered Roy advice about getting the Iola to Samoa. He said he'd suggested Roy and Stephanie should go there, but Roy had just become angry and refused the help. Wolfe cautioned the Grahams that it would be easy for an unsuspecting couple to disappear on a place like Palmyra. In response, Mac opened a drawer and pulled out a .357 Magnum. He assured the others that he could take care of himself. I'm tougher than he is, Mac said confidently. Wolfe and Sanders left Palmyra the next day.
The group of people that were down there, the various boats, one by one, of course, were on their way somewhere, and they, one after another, left.
Visitors had come and gone pretty regularly for the last 2 months, but with the departure of Wolfe and Sanders on August 17th, things changed. This was the end of the season when most sailors would be stopping by Palmyra. Mac and Muff Graham were alone on the island with Stephanie and Roy. On August 27th, Mac talked to Kurt Shoemaker. Roy and Stephanie and the Grahams had been alone on Palmyra for 10 days. The tension between Mac and Muff Graham and Roy and Stephanie had increased. Muff knew Roy had a gun and a chainsaw, and at one point he'd been seen with an acetylene torch. This scared her and she wanted off Palmyra, but Mac stubbornly didn't want to leave. The boats had moved to opposite sides of the lagoon and the couples pretty much ignored each other. But then, something unusual happened.
Here is KH6IHG. I was talking to him, and while we're talking, he hears a female voice yelling, saying something, calling to him. And he says, "Oh, what's this company?" So he says, "Hang on a minute, I'll go topside and see." And he says, "I'll be darned. She's coming over in her dinghy, and she says she has a cake for him." And he says, "I guess they're going to declare a truce or something, huh?" That was the words he used. He says, "I better check this out carefully." I said, "Okay." So same schedule next week, same time. So I said, "Be careful now, and see you later." That was it.
1 week later, Shoemaker was at his radio for their regularly scheduled conversation. For the first time since Mac and Muff had left Hawaii, there was no response from the sea wind.
I was concerned about that, and I tried for quite a while, about 20 minutes to half an hour, trying to make contact. So the next contact was a couple of days later, and then I tried again, nothing. And then for the next few weeks, I tried, intermittently from time to time. And then it was at that point that I decided something happened.
Unable to convince the authorities that something had gone wrong on Palmyra, Shoemaker had a friend fly over the island. The aerial survey seemed to confirm his worst fears. Palmyra was deserted. There were no boats in the harbor, no Iola, no sea wind, and there was no sign of life.
Well, I had a feeling that all that time that something had happened. The boat had been taken over. I was very strong feelings about that, simply because of all of the incidents that they related to me and he related, and I mean it just pointed to that one thing, but I couldn't convince anyone that that was a problem.
Shoemaker did have one resource available to him, the radio. Having no idea where they had gone, he spread the word to yachtsmen in the Pacific to be on the lookout for the sea wind. But days, weeks, and then months passed with no word about the fate of Mac and Muff Graham or the sea wind. 2 months after the last communication with the Grahams, Bernard and Evelyn Leonard, who had been given the last written message from the Grahams, were at the Alawai Yacht Harbor in Hawaii. Bernard noticed a 38-foot ketch with very distinctive lines.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
Well,
is.
then it had to
It had been repainted, but Bernard was certain it was the sea wind. He also recognized a familiar figure on deck, Roy Allen. Knowing the tensions that had existed between the Grahams and Roy and Stephanie, and also knowing that the Grahams had not been heard from in some time, Leonard immediately called the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard had been aware of the missing sea wind.
Yes,
When Leonard explained that the owners were not on the boat, the Coast Guard officers felt this might lead to something outside of their jurisdiction. They called the FBI. The call was answered by Special Agent Calvin Shishido, who worked out of the FBI's Hawaii field office.
My assignment there was just a general mix of general criminal investigations, security investigations, backgrounds. It was such a small office that we couldn't specialize. We had to handle everything that came at us.
Shishido agreed to meet the Coast Guard and the Leonards at the marina, although what he heard was not conclusive enough to warrant FBI involvement. Perhaps the owners were on shore, or perhaps they had sold the boat. Perhaps it wasn't even the sea wind. After arriving moments later, the Leonards showed him the yacht in question. There seemed to be no one aboard.
So he pointed out the areas where there was an attempt to disguise the boat. You know, it had been repainted, the gunnels had been repainted, the nameplate was taken off, it was removed and painted over. and other things that he pointed out to show that it was actually the sea wind. He knew it was the sea wind.
Although there was still no direct evidence of foul play, Shishido was growing suspicious. There was no visible activity on the boat, so Shishido instructed the Coast Guard officers to post a lookout. The lookout spotted Roy and Stephanie the next morning, rowing from the floating dock towards shore in a little dinghy. He immediately alerted the Coast Guard, who in turn called Special Agent Shishido. But another boat owner hailed Stephanie and Roy and told them that the Coast Guard had been looking around their boat the day before. Roy noticed a Coast Guard patrol boat in the marina that seemed to be moving towards them. Roy quickly changed direction and headed for the nearest dock. After letting Roy off, Stephanie started to row back to the sea ring. Two plainclothes policemen were approaching Roy when he spotted them. Without hesitating, he turned and dove off the end of the dock and began to swim away. The officers found a wallet on the dock.
And in it was the identification of this Roy Allen, and it had a photograph. And I believe Mr. Leonard looked at the picture and said that was Roy Allen.
Meanwhile, the Coast Guard boat had spotted Stephanie in the rowboat and began to give chase. She turned and started to row towards shore, hoping to reach the dock before they caught up with her. When she reached the dock, she jumped out and began to run, but there was nowhere for her to go. The patrol boat was right behind, with Bernard Leonard aboard. He and a Coast Guardsman followed her. They saw her dart into a hotel stairwell. They found her hiding behind a potted palm. She immediately recognized Leonard from Palmyra.
Come with us.
As the Coast Guard officer took her into custody, one question was foremost on Leonard's mind. What had happened to the Grahams? Stephanie Stearns was taken to the Coast Guard offices for questioning. On the way there, Bernard Leonard and Stephanie found themselves alone in the rowboat. When he asked if Mac and Muff were still alive, she shook her head. Mac and Muff, she told him, had apparently drowned. At least, they never found their bodies. Leonard was incredulous. How could that have happened? Stephanie explained that she and Roy had been invited to the Sea Wind for dinner, but the Grahams never showed up. The next morning, she and Roy found the Grahams' overturned inflatable Zodiac boat washed up on shore in the shark-infested lagoon. After searching fruitlessly for the bodies, they decided to take their own boat back to Hawaii, but it got hung up on the reef. So they went back and took the abandoned Sea Wind. Leonard listened to Stephanie, but he didn't believe her story.
As I remember it, I was
In the Coast Guard offices, she started telling her story again, this time to Special Agent Shishido and the Coast Guard.
At any time. Okay.
This is the way it happened. This is the way I'm telling it to you.
Details then of what happened to them.
At one point, I remember speaking to her. She kept going on, and I kept reminding her that she had the right to remain silent and that anything she said could be used against her in a court of law. And she would just keep on talking.
Stephanie told him she had arrived at the Seawind with Roy just about in time for dinner. The boat was strangely quiet. They called out, but no one answered.
Hello? Hello? Mac? Muff? Hello?
They went below and continued their search, but got no reply.
I can't find anybody down here.
They're not here.
Didn't you say they were gonna meet us here?
Yeah, they knew we were coming for dinner.
They assumed the Grahams had gone out fishing for dinner and made themselves at home till they returned.
There's nobody here.
According to Stephanie, the Grahams never showed up, so they both decided to spend the night on the Seawind.
All right.
They believed the Grahams would show up any time. But the next morning, when the Grahams hadn't returned, she said they became very worried and went out to look for Muff and Mac as soon as it was light. But all they found was the Grahams' overturned Zodiac washed up on shore and a can full of gasoline. They turned the inflated boat over and started the motor. Then she said they spent the next 2 days searching for the Grahams or any sign of what might have happened to them. But they found nothing. The Grahams had simply vanished. Shishido found her story implausible.
Thing together, and we went over there.
When she explained how they had taken possession of the Seawind, her story was quite different from the one she had just told Leonard.
No one would have believed us. They would have taken
This
the
time,
boat.
she said they had left Palmyra aboard the Seawind towing the Iola, which got caught up on a reef and sank.
And all we found
Stephanie was
the
tripping
Zodiac.
over her first lie.
And
But I knew there were at least, two conflicting stories as to how they got in possession of the boat. At this point, we became very worried about the Graham's condition. We didn't know what had happened to them, and we certainly was not going to get any real true information from Stephanie Stearns.
but
The FBI has jurisdiction over crime on the high seas. Shishido determined he had enough evidence to arrest Stephanie Stearns for interstate transportation of stolen property. Then his attention turned to Stephanie's boyfriend, Roy Allen, who had evaded the police at the marina and was still at large. Shishido checked, and there was no record of a Roy Allen, but he had the wallet with Roy Allen's picture. Bernard Leonard also told Shishido that Roy had taken marijuana plants to Palmyra and had intended to grow them to sell. Drugs and a photograph of Roy gave him a starting place.
But I suspected that people with, traveling on the Iola, which is not really a seaworthy boat, going around and planting marijuana on the islands and so on, must be involved in drug running.
Hi, Cal. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. What can I do for you today?
Shishido took the photograph to the Drug Enforcement Agency and showed it to several of the agents.
So we would like to get further information on here.
They were
Well, we do have a
surprised when they
file
looked
on
at the
Buck.
picture.
Let me get into it.
They
look
told him
around
that
and
it was
see what I
Buck
can get.
Walker
That's great.
and that they had been looking for him.
I'll get back to you on that. Have a good day.
Same to you.
All right.
And so we got all the background data on Buck Walker, and that's when our search for Buck Walker began. And now we're looking for Buck Walker instead of Roy Allen.
Buck Dwayne Walker was a convicted felon and a fugitive. He had been awaiting sentencing on a drug conviction when he and Stephanie fled Hawaii on the Iola headed for Palmyra. As the search for Walker began with a new urgency, Shishido was also concerned about the Grahams. He knew Stephanie was lying and changing details about what had happened on Palmyra. He didn't trust her story about the fate of the Grahams. There was always the possibility that the Grahams were alive and stranded on the island. Shishido made arrangements for himself and some other agents to travel to Palmyra to see if they could find them.
We decided to go to Palmyra to see if maybe the Grahams were stranded there, in need of food, and or they could have been tied up for all we know, and immobile, and their lives were in danger. So we decided to go out there to look around, and we did.
On the island, they found the remains of the camp Buck Walker had abandoned. They took photographs and examined the site thoroughly. A search of the island produced no sign of the Grahams. However, Shishido did make a couple of curious discoveries.
I remember picking up a hatch cover, and of course later it was identified as a hatch cover coming off of the Iola.
The hatch cover was important because no seaman would leave for high waters without his hatch cover. Without it, the boat could take on water, which would cause it to sink. This told Shishido that Roy and Stephanie had intended to scuttle the Iola. Using these clues, Shishido began to develop his theory as to what happened to the Grahams.
My thinking was that they had tied the couple up and put them on the Iola and sank the Iola. And that was the only explanation we had because we couldn't find the Iola, and there was no way the Iola could be in Hawaii because they certainly wouldn't be sailing the Seawind and the Iola by themselves.
Shishido found something at an old Navy warehouse that piqued his interest.
I think one of the things, too, that I noticed was that in an old workshop or warehouse, there was an old air rescue boat or sea rescue boat, and it had place for 3 containers where they put provisions. And of the 3, 2 receptacle areas were, the cans were missing, and the third was still left there. And of course, now we're looking for 2 people. In my mind, suspiciously thought that these 2 cans, because, it was large enough that they could have been, containing the remains of the couple.
Meanwhile, the search for Buck Walker continued. On November 8th, 1974, after spending 10 days hiding out on the lava flows on the big island of Hawaii, Buck resurfaced in a tiny hamlet off the beaten track. He rented a room and went to a restaurant for a drink. At the same moment, across the street, 2 uniformed officers were eating lunch. As they paid the bill, they showed their waitress a picture of Buck Walker. She said he'd just been in the restaurant looking for a drink, and she'd sent him to a bar across the street. The officers spotted him and contacted the FBI. Buck was arrested on a fugitive charge. He was read his rights and handcuffed without a struggle.
FBI, you're under arrest.
Under questioning, Buck revealed nothing that could help the investigation. He answered questions with a frank yes or no, or with stone silence. The investigators couldn't find even the slightest piece of information that could help them find the Grahams.
Right arm.
While Stephanie was in prison awaiting trial, Shishido found more proof Stephanie and Buck were lying.
While she was at prison, we found out that she had some photographs developed. So when the photographs were developed and brought back to prison, we seized the photographs and examined them. Among the photographs showed that the Seawind, or Stephanie Stearns, was on the Seawind taking a photograph of the Iola under full sail with Buck Walker on board the Iola. So we knew that at one point Stephanie was on the Seawind and Buck Walker by himself on the Iola.
This was different than the stories both Buck and Stephanie told officials. Shishido was convinced that the Grahams had been murdered. But without any bodies and no hard evidence, the U.S. attorney assigned to prosecute the case did not believe they could make a homicide charge stand up in court.
We could, but it's strictly circumstantial, and we might not win the case. And if we lose the case, and later, years later, if the body should pop up and we get some real good evidence as to murder on the part of the Buck Walker and Stephanie Stearns, he said we couldn't try them again. So I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Buck Walker and Stephanie Stearns were charged with interstate transportation of stolen property. It was an open and shut case. Buck and Stephanie had been caught with possession of the Seawind in Hawaii and had made numerous attempts to change its appearance. Buck had registered it under his name as a homemade boat. Buck and Stephanie were both found guilty. Buck Walker received 10 years for his previous drug conviction and 5 years for theft of the Seawind. Stephanie Stearns received 2 years for her role in the boat theft. But Shishido was still convinced the couple had killed Mac and Muff Graham, and that somewhere on or around Palmyra was the evidence to prove it. He could only hope that someday it might surface, and then he could charge Buck and Stephanie with murder. On January 21st, 1981, a young South African couple, Robert and Sharon Jordan, were visiting Palmyra. Almost 7 years had passed since Mac and Muff Graham disappeared. That afternoon, Sharon went for a walk down the beach and made a startling discovery. Washed up on the shore was an aluminum canister, and beside it, she found human bones and a skull. Around one of the bones was a wristwatch. She had heard the story of Mac and Muff Graham and immediately contacted the Coast Guard. Cal Shishido was catching up on paperwork when he overheard part of a phone conversation.
Human bones? Palmyra?
First he heard the words human bones, and then Palmyra. Where's Palmyra? The agent was new and had never heard of the case. Shishido was on his feet immediately.
Who are you talking
Who was on the phone, he asked. The agent told him it was the Coast Guard. Shishido quickly took the phone and told the Coast Guard to ask the couple who had discovered the bones to stay on the island and wait for them.
When I first heard that, of course, I was really excited because I thought, whoa, somebody found some bones on Palmyra, and it had to be the Grahams, and I thought, this is it.
Shishido and a team of investigators flew to Palmyra to examine the new findings. If the bones Sharon Jordan found belonged to either one of the Grahams, the FBI might be able to establish the cause of death. Shishido was shown the gruesome discovery: a skull, human bones, a wristwatch, and some wire, all lying next to an open metal box, identical to the kind Shishido noticed in the rescue boats on his previous visit to the island. He speculated that the wire had been wrapped around the case and had somehow come loose. Then when the case came ashore, it had opened and the bones had spilled out. Since a second container had been missing from the Navy rescue boat, Shishido felt the other victim might still be inside. Divers were sent to search the surrounding waters, looking for a container like the one found on the beach. But in the shark-infested waters, the divers found nothing. When Shishido got back to Honolulu, he sent the container, wire, skull, and bones to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. for examination. The skull belonged to a Caucasian woman in her late 40s or early 50s. Dental records showed that it was Muff Graham's. The skull also had signs of charring around the left eye socket and a hole in the left temple. The FBI concluded that the contour of the hole was consistent with a gunshot wound, but due to the age of the wound, could not say conclusively that it was caused by a bullet. The aluminum box was examined by the FBI Elemental Analysis Unit. They found evidence of charring on the outside of the box. Next, the FBI needed to determine if the skeleton had been in the box. They cut out a rectangular section and subjected it to a battery of tests. The rectangular piece of metal was found to contain traces of human protein, conclusive proof that the box had once held a body.
The FBI did a tremendous job as far as the container was concerned, because they came back with a report that indicated that there were human remains in the container, that the remains had been burned, and that while it was in flame, the container was in about 2 inches of water. And they found traces of human protein, human fabric in the container and everything, to indicate that a human body was disposed of in the container by flame.
As Shishido had suspected, Muff Graham had not simply drowned, she had been murdered. The FBI now believed it had enough evidence to prosecute Buck and Stephanie for the murder of Muff Graham. Having served her jail term for the theft of the Seawind, Stephanie now had a white-collar job in California. She was arrested and taken into custody. Buck Walker was still serving time in prison, or so Shishido thought.
When I sent our agents in the state of Washington a lead to put a detainer on Buck Walker, I found out that he was an escapee. And so I thought, oh no, not again. You know, are we going to have to do this search all over for him? We found that there was only one woman that had visited him, and that she had visited him the day before his escape.
A trace was placed on the woman, which led them to her car, parked in a motel in Yuma, Nevada. The FBI was notified and set up a stakeout. When Buck and another man came out of the motel and approached the car, the FBI moved in. He was considered an armed and dangerous fugitive, wanted both for murder and jailbreak. On the front seat of the car, they found barbiturates and several thousands of dollars in cash. Buck Walker was arrested and charged with the murder of Muff Graham. Stephanie Stearns was also arrested and charged with the same crime, though they would be tried separately. Because of the publicity the story had generated in Hawaii, the trials were moved to San Francisco. Both cases were assigned to federal prosecutor Elliot Inoki. The motive for the crime was never in doubt.
The motive was they were without a seaworthy vessel. The only other couple on the island was leaving shortly. They were running out of food, and they didn't know when any other vessel would get there, if at all, because this was becoming the end of the so-called season when you could expect people to visit the island. So you had people running out of food and provisions with an inability to get anywhere.
Inoki knew he could show Buck and Stephanie had opportunity and motive to kill the Grahams. But first he had to prove in court that Muff Graham was murdered. He also needed to completely discredit Buck and Stephanie's story that the Grahams had drowned. As Inoki began constructing his theory of the case, Shishido was busy putting holes in Buck and Stephanie's defense. The FBI had already found evidence of human protein on the sides of the aluminum box. But since the bones were found next to it, Inoki wanted additional proof that the body had actually been in the box. Therefore, ruling out the possibility of Muff drowning as Buck and Stephanie had claimed, he contacted San Francisco's chief medical examiner, Boyd Stevens.
Finding the skeleton together is supportive that Miss Graham was in that box and therefore held together. It's not possible for me to really say that she couldn't have stayed together if she had been out of the box. However, the problems that would be required is that the skeleton has to stay together even after it's disarticulated. And that's an extremely strong argument that that could not have occurred if she had died and just been laying on the lagoon bottom. The second is that the skeleton has to come ashore together, and that's just not really possible.
Shishido also decided to test Buck and Stephanie's story that the Grahams' dinghy, the Zodiac, had been found overturned.
Of course, you know, later investigation showed that if the boat had capsized the way they said they found it, the outboard motor would have been inoperable because of the salt water going into the engine itself. And of course, we made a test to find out whether the Zodiac could actually tip over accidentally, and we tried to force it to turn upside down, banging into things with 3 or 4 men sitting on one edge of the boat, and it just wouldn't tip over.
Inoki also asked medical examiner Boyd Stevens to examine Muff Graham's skull in order to corroborate the FBI's findings that Muff had been murdered. Inoki knew that having two highly respected sources would strengthen his case. Stephens found flat abrasions to the skull, consistent with prolonged confinement in a box, such as the aluminum container.
The key issues for us was the flattening of the skull, which represents that it had been placed against a hard, flat surface, primarily across the left side of the face. And what I'm pointing to is the nose, the eye sockets, and what would be the cheek and life, and of course the teeth. One of the things that was evident about the skull of Miss Graham is that this whole area about the face had been planed down so that it was a flat surface. And if you can imagine, if I take this skull and put it across a flat surface, and let's just say this table is coated with sandpaper, and I work it back and forth for a period of time, eventually I would shave it down till it was a flat surface. There was a second plane showing that the skull had changed position and again had been exposed to a flat surface with motion for a long period of time. We used that as an argument that the skull had been within the box and moving. If the body had been buried in the coral sand, then it would not be a change that we would expect to see. And coffin wear is not seen if somebody's buried in dirt or in coral. It's seen if they're in a hard surface container.
There were minimal animal bite marks and insects on the skull, which were consistent with remains that had only been exposed to the surface life for a short period of time, presumably the time after the box had surfaced and opened. But what about the charring on the skull in the metal box? Did this show an attempt to destroy the body?
One of the questions we had been asked is whether we could prove that the skull had been burned with an acetylene torch.
People who were at Palmyra when Buck and Stephanie were there saw Buck with an acetylene torch. The FBI believed this is what caused the burns to the skull. If Inoki could have Stephens corroborate this, he could further implicate Walker.
If a person is exposed to a flame, there may be burning of the outer portions of the skin, but until the water's evaporated, the tissue can't burn. And it takes a heat period to boil the water off or evaporate it before the tissue can actually burn. Acetylene torches, of course, run fairly hot, and they would do that process fairly rapidly.
The marks on the skull clearly showed the use of an extreme source of heat. Further evidence that Muff had been murdered. The forensic evidence overwhelmingly proved that Muff Graham had been murdered. A trial date was set. A trial involving people who live on the high seas presents some unique challenges. The FBI had to subpoena about 40 witnesses and then make sure they were in San Francisco at the time of the trial. Special Agent Hal Marshall was assigned to the case.
I first became involved when I transferred to Honolulu in 1981 from Los Angeles. Witnesses were flying in from all over the world, literally. Sharon Jordan and her husband and 2 children came in twice from South Africa. And one of the hard situations was a lot of these people were boating people who did not keep in touch. Last we heard of some of them, they were in a bay in Hawaii in a boat with no fixed address. So it was a matter of getting them to San Francisco, sometime having to wait 2 or 3 days, sometime postponing it. Weather conditions and things like that that required us to be sure they were there when we needed them. And luckily, everybody showed up that needed to show up, and everything went smooth.
There were only 2 possible suspects, and Buck had an extensive criminal record. But did Buck commit the murder alone, or was Stephanie also involved? She was the last person known to have contact with the Grahams on the day she brought them a cake. Elliot Inoki believes Stephanie had one strong advantage on her side.
Well, she had one option. She could blame Walker. And although she didn't directly do that, her attorney certainly did in the way the case was argued and presented. That gave her a very big option that Walker simply did not have, or if he had, it was a much more difficult sell because of the circumstances and the personalities involved. He's the one with the prior record, much bigger than she is. You know, the testimony about him shooting fish with his gun. I mean, he had a lot of things on his side of the ledger that were not on her side of the ledger. One of the other substantial differences is that Stephanie testified in the case. Walker did not, and so she directly refuted any claim of knowledge or involvement in any kind of homicide. But certainly, through her testimony, left a large room for her attorney to argue that Mr. Walker had the opportunity and the means to commit a murder.
A jury found Buck Walker guilty after only a few hours of deliberations, and he received a sentence of life in prison. Stephanie Stearns was defended by famed attorney Vincent Bugliosi, who was convinced of her innocence. She was acquitted of all charges when he convinced a jury that Buck not only acted alone, but sought to conceal the crime from his girlfriend. We may never know what really happened on Palmyra on that day in late August, though the forensic evidence paints a grisly picture.
Well, empirically, I believe that that Miss Graham was killed exactly as the charge was made. That is, that she was shot, that there was an attempt to burn her body, that her extremities were probably fractured to get her into the box, and that she was cast into the ocean and then eventually came adrift. And I think that that probably happened to the husband as well.
Matt Graham's body has never been found, although investigators believe there's a very high likelihood that he's in the other box. In a Montana campground, a little girl is taken as she sleeps. Recalling a similar crime, investigators fear a killer is back. Desperate to find the girl alive, they face grim clues, false leads, and a cunning suspect. Police, agents, and a mother with unshakable determination struggle to solve the mystery of what happened in those dark woods.
While camping with her family in Montana, a 7-year-old girl was abducted from her tent. No one in the campground witnessed the crime, and the kidnapper left no clues. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. At the time, little was known of criminal profiling. Agents would use it as they raced against the clock to find a criminal more monstrous than anyone imagined.
Southwestern Montana, a land of epic mountain ranges and vast prairies. In June 1973, the Yeager family came to Montana from Michigan. Marietta Yeager was excited about her family exploring the West. Bill Yeager, a longtime auto worker, had taken a month off for this once-in-a-lifetime trip. It was 7-year-old Susie's first family vacation. Marietta's parents had also joined them for the trip. On Sunday, June 24th, they prepared to spend their last night in Montana's Headwaters State Park. In the morning, they would continue west. The eldest boy slept in the van, while the 4 young ones had their own tent.
All right, tuck yourselves in good, guys.
Like every night, Susie wouldn't go to sleep without a goodnight hug and kiss.
Sleep fast.
The night was chilly. Still, the Jaeger children slept peacefully. The adults slept in a camper truck a few feet away. But not everyone in the campground was asleep. Around 4 a.m., a breeze awoke 13-year-old Heidi Jaeger. She noticed a hole in the tent. Then she noticed Susie wasn't there. Confused and scared, she rushed to tell her parents. Marietta Jaeger tried to understand what her daughter was saying.
I just thought that she must be just somewhere around. She's around, she had to go to the bathroom, but at the same time, there's this terror rising in you that, oh, please God, don't let this be true. Don't let this be true. I mean, I can remember wanting to wake up and find out that this is not real. This is not really happening.
Then they saw the hole sliced in the tent.
That's when it's like it or not, Marietta, this is reality, and more than she's gone, but someone has taken her.
Their hearts sank further when they spotted Susie's stuffed animals in the grass.
She was sleeping with them. She always slept with them, and she must have dropped them because she couldn't hold on to them. It made it clear to me that she was taken away by force.
Right away, Bill Jaeger drove to a phone to call police.
Okay, Mr. Jaeger, slow down. I need you to tell me what's going on. I want you to hold on the line. I'm going to get help.
The sheriff's dispatcher immediately radioed Gallatin County Deputy Don Houghton, who was working the night shift.
State Park Campground. Have report of a 7-year-old.
10-4, I'm away.
On the way to the headwaters, Deputy Houghton stopped to pick up City County investigator John Onstad. Violent crime was rare in the area, so at first, investigator Onstad thought it a false alarm.
We're thinking that it really must be something else, that something like this would not be a kidnapping and it would resolve itself somehow.
When the investigators arrived, the Jaeger family was distraught. As the Jaegers explained what they could, they brought the investigators to the back of the campsite. That changed everything for Deputy Houghton.
And that's when we saw the tent, and that the tent had been slit, and that kind of picked things up a little bit. It was a little eerie.
Footprints from the family were scattered around the tent in the damp grass. But investigator Onstad could see one set with a clear direction.
I could see the tracks in the dew coming to and from the area where the tent was, going back to a parking area, and the parking area had no vehicles in it.
The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office contacted the FBI.
1022, Haugen here.
Special Agent Pete Dunbar took the call at the Bozeman Field Office.
Special Agent Dunbar.
The FBI often joins kidnapping investigations because of the possibility of interstate travel.
Got a call on
In any abduction, time is critical, as the chance of finding a victim alive diminishes with each passing hour.
What is it? I'll tell you on the way.
Dunbar and Special Agent William Terry left for the campground immediately. By the time the agents arrived, local deputies had started a search for Susie and had begun interviewing the other campers. The only clues so far were the footprints and the gash in the tent. But that was enough to convince Special Agent Dunbar what happened.
No question there was a kidnapping. In some cases you don't know, some types it's a parental type of thing, but in this instance, absolutely no question but there was a kidnapping of a child.
The search quickly became one of the largest in Montana history.
We had helicopters, we used the National Guard flying, we had boats, we had all-terrain vehicles, we had riders out identifying areas of abandoned buildings, old mine sites, anywhere where a person might be located.
They began at the Jaeger campsite, then expanded in widening circles. During the search, a few veteran deputies recalled a similar investigation in the same campground 5 years earlier. That crime was discovered May 5th, 1968, when during a troop outing, a Boy Scout tried to wake up his tent mate. The 12-year-old had been stabbed and beaten during the night. The scout's lung had been punctured, and he suffered severe head trauma. He died the following day. That case remained unsolved. Many of those searching for Susie couldn't help but wonder if that killer was back. While the search of the woods continued, some deputies began tracking possible suspects. Reviewing criminal records, they began with sex offenders living nearby. Those without alibis were asked to come in for lie detector tests, according to Special Agent Dunbar.
In the immediate area, there were 3 or 4 absolute prime suspects because of past activities dealing with children. One in particular that was looked at very carefully.
The polygraph examiner asked the suspect about the night Susie vanished. Though their use is controversial, polygraphs monitor changes in heart rate, respiration, and perspiration that most people exhibit when they tell a lie. The suspect said he could not remember what he was doing that night. The polygraph results were inconclusive. Hoping for more information, agents sent the suspect to a nearby psychiatric hospital to be interrogated under sodium amytal, often referred to as truth serum. A barbiturate, sodium amytal produces a relaxed state in which suspects become less defensive and therefore more talkative. Under its influence, most people are unable to lie. Once the drug took effect and the suspect relaxed, his memory returned.
Anyone by that name? You never met anyone by that name?
He remembered what he had been doing during the time of the kidnapping. He had been in Butte, Montana. We checked it out. People in Butte could verify what he said was correct, and he was eliminated.
Hopes of a quick arrest were dashed. Police and the FBI sought the public's help. Hundreds of alarmed citizens throughout Montana called in tips. Deputies followed up on each one. One caller urged authorities to interview his 25-year-old neighbor in Manhattan, Montana, describing him as odd. The deputies knew the man, a local contractor. Nothing appeared suspicious, however. And like others in the community, he said he would do what he could to help. Then, a week after Susie disappeared, a man telephoned the home of a Gallatin County, Montana deputy.
Who is this?
The deputy's wife answered.
Just a minute, let me call him. Hold on.
The caller claimed to be Susie's kidnapper and demanded a $50,000 ransom be delivered to a bus station in Denver. To confirm he had Susie, he described a minor deformity: rounded, hump-like nails on the young girl's index fingers.
Okay.
The woman called her husband, who contacted the FBI at the command center set up at the campground. Special Agent Dunbar told the Yeagers about the ransom call. When he mentioned the fingernails, they were stunned. Susie did have rounded nails on her index fingers. The call was legitimate. Agents needed the kidnapper to call back with details about the ransom drop. But the call never came. A crushing blow for the family and investigators, according to FBI Special Agent William Terry.
As time went by and there was nothing to give directions as to where the money should be placed or how she was going to be returned, the hope left.
Watching deputies drag the rivers in Headwaters Park for a body was agonizing for the Yeagers. Yet Marietta and Bill refused to give up hope.
I made a commitment to stay faithful to her as her mother, that not to give up, to continue to believe that she was still alive until such time, if ever it would have to happen, that I would have to accept concrete proof to the contrary.
Still, the Yeagers could not remain in the campground forever. Bill needed to return to work, so after more than a month, the family had to go home.
And it was so hard to leave, you know, for me, to leave the last place that I had seen her.
Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, they had not been able to find the kidnapper. But soon, he would find Marietta. In June 1973, 7-year-old Susie Yeager was abducted from her tent in Headwaters State Park, Montana. Although the family had to return to Michigan, the FBI assured Susie's parents, Bill and Marietta Yeager, that they would not give up on the case.
Now, as soon as we got to Detroit, the FBI agents were waiting for us. And so I felt I could trust them. I felt that they were competent and they were willing to keep me informed. And for me, that was very important. I needed to know everything that was going on.
Though investigators thought Susie had likely been murdered, the Yeagers still hoped she was alive and that the kidnapper would make contact again. The FBI arranged for the phone company to trace any calls from the kidnapper and asked the Yeagers to place a recording device on their telephone.
I think the kids and I should be able to handle that. Doesn't seem too technical.
The family and their friends worked diligently to make certain nobody forgot about Susie. They established the Susie Yeager Reward Fund and printed 10,000 posters, which they mailed to every sheriff's office in Montana and the surrounding states, asking for them to be posted locally. Months passed. Still, the family continued to hope the kidnapper would call.
And it just sort of became my task to be there on the phone. And only one time did I leave in the beginning, and that was to pick up a son, one of my kids, at a class from which he was supposed to have gotten a ride home, but that didn't show. And so I was out of the house 10 minutes, and the kidnapper called.
Following established routine, the eldest son, Dan, who remained in the house, snapped on the tape recorder.
Who is this?
Would you like to know where Susie is?
Dan asked the kidnapper to release his sister. The caller complained that the police and FBI were involved.
Yeah? You may think
He said he couldn't release Susie without getting caught.
Wait, no, don't hang up. Don't hang, no.
Seconds later, Marietta came home.
Danny had just hung up the phone, and I could just tell by the look on his face, it was just stricken. He didn't even have to tell me. I knew he had just spoken to the kidnapper. And we had that call on tape, but no way of knowing who it was.
Authorities traced the call to a diner in Wyoming. Local officers checked the place, but the caller was gone, and employees did not recall anyone who had been on the payphone. FBI Special Agent William Terry.
There was a consensus of opinion at that time that Susie was dead.
Yeah.
And for some reason, this individual was attempting to torment the Yeager family.
Months passed with no new leads or calls. 8 months after Susie's kidnapping, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office received a report that a 19-year-old woman had disappeared from Manhattan, Montana, 10 miles from the campground where Susie vanished. Her mother was worried and told the deputies what she knew.
I had fun. You drove safe, right?
She said that her daughter, Sandra Smolligan, was last seen on February 9th, returning to her apartment around midnight after a night out with friends. Her mother said Sandra's car was gone, and no one had heard from her in days. Like almost everyone in the small town, the deputies knew Sandra. They opened a missing persons case and set out in search of her car. Gallatin County Deputy Don Houghton, still working the Susie Yeager kidnapping, was also part of the new investigation.
The area that I was assigned was to the northwest of the town of Manhattan. And this was a large area. And what we were doing was driving county roads, dirt roads, farm roads, looking for the car.
On an abandoned ranch in the Horseshoe Hills, Deputy Houghton noticed fresh tire tracks off a dirt road, then spotted something that seemed out of place.
Got out to see what it was, and it happened to be a pair of women's panties.
Houghton wanted to check out the barn nearby. The door was nailed shut. Inside, a tarp and other debris covered a car. The license plate had been removed. But in the small community, most people knew their neighbors' vehicles. Deputy Houghton recognized the car. It was Sandra Smolligan's. There was no trace of the young woman.
Needed 1013 on a white Ford.
Houghton called in the find.
WP 521.
Deputies, sheriff's posse members, and volunteers scoured 5 square miles surrounding the barn. In line searches, they marked any items that might be evidence. 2 days into the search, one group investigated a 55-gallon drum they found in a field.
There's something right here. Can you get a couple pictures?
Something had been burned inside.
Step back, please. Step back.
Among charred wood were bone fragments.
And the more we looked, we found bones spread out probably over a 75-yard area, most in very small pieces. They'd been broken up, chopped up, they were burned.
In the end, they collected more than 1,200 bone fragments. A forensic pathologist determined they were human, and some were probably from an adult white female. Dental records confirmed several teeth and jawbone fragments belonged to Sandra Smoligan. Investigator John Onstad feared that Sandra's killer might have also kidnapped Susie Yeager.
There was beginning to be a connection. Probably partly due to the part of the country we live in and what goes on here, what doesn't go on here.
Sandra Smoligan had been dismembered. Whoever committed such an unspeakable crime might have taken Susie too.
Hey, deputy.
8 months after Susie Yeager vanished from a Montana campground, deputies discovered the remains of Sandra Smoligan at a nearby Horseshoe Hills ranch. Authorities feared a connection.
There you go.
The investigators working the two cases frequently ate lunch together. One resident often joined them, always asking about the cases. David Masterson was an ex-Marine and a well-known local contractor. Some townspeople considered him strange. In the first week of the investigation, Masterson had been questioned about Susie's disappearance. Deputy Don Houghton knew that people who are overly curious about a crime are often involved.
On numerous occasions, David would come in and sit with us and eat. Always inquisitive. We were always cautious of what we said around him. But he was always volunteering for a search. Just kept in front of us, I guess. It bugged us.
FBI Special Agent Pete Dunbar realized Masterson was familiar with the area where Sandra's body was found.
David surfaced as a suspect again because we knew enough about David from before to know that he knew the Horseshoe Hills very well. And also it developed that he had dated this girl, Sandra Smoligan.
Investigators asked Masterson to take a polygraph examination. He agreed.
I had a great deal of faith in a polygraph. I had had it utilized on other cases before, and invariably was a tremendous tool and never had one where it backfired.
During the examination, Masterson denied knowing anything about Susie Yeager's kidnapping or Sandra Smoligan's murder. He confirmed he dated Sandra only once because she didn't want to go out with him again. The polygraph examiner detected no sign of deception. As they had with other suspects in the Susie Yeager case, agents asked him to submit to questioning under sodium amytal.
You know Susie Yeager? I do. I mean, I've heard about her.
At the psychiatric hospital under the barbiturate's influence, Masterson calmly answered every question.
He said everything then that he told me in my interview before we did sodium amytal. He didn't deviate one iota. As far as my interview is concerned, there was no difference whether he had it or did not have it. Put the investigation back to where we had nothing. We just ran out of everything. Couldn't have been more discouraged. We didn't know where to go. We had run out of suspects.
In the spring of 1974, the stalled case gathered new momentum after Dunbar met Special Agent Patrick Mullaney, who worked in the emerging field of criminal profiling. Believing he could help, Mullaney asked for the files in the Yeager case.
Give us all the interviews you've conducted. Give us all of the results of the investigations you've conducted. And we sat down for days going over all of those interviews, especially what kind of investigation that they were conducting. And we came back with an idea.
To the profilers, the nature of the crime, including surveillance and a stealthy abduction, suggested the kidnapper had military training. He must have had the physical strength to carry and keep quiet a 55-pound girl who might be struggling. The profilers believe the perpetrator was a loner, possibly a schizophrenic, who has trouble with the opposite sex. One suspect jumped out again, David Masterson.
When we came up with David Masterson as our most likely suspect, we met a whole lot of opposition from the local police department, as well as the FBI agent. And the reason for the opposition was very reasonable. It was simply that he had been a suspect early on, and they had asked of him to take certain truth tests, and David had passed both of them.
But a schizophrenic can disassociate from reality to such a degree, he might be able to lie without exhibiting any stress, thus beating the tests. The profilers also made a prediction that the kidnapper would telephone Marietta Yeager on the anniversary of the abduction.
We felt that this was such an intimate killer, that he had become personally involved in the killing and in the victim and the victim's life and in the victim's family's life, that he would much celebrate this event like a normal person would celebrate an anniversary.
To flush the kidnapper out, Marietta Yeager granted an interview to an Associated Press reporter. She said her religious faith allowed her to feel sorry for the kidnapper and that she would like to talk to him to find out why he did it. On the night of June 24th, 1974, 1 year after Susie vanished, Marietta went to bed, knowing that although she needed it, she would not rest. As she raced to the phone and recorder, she hoped, finally, to get some answers.
Yes, this is.
Exactly 1 year after Susie Yeager vanished from a Montana campground, a man telephoned Susie's mother, Marietta.
Hello?
The first thing he said was, "Is this Susie's mom?" And then I knew for certain who it was. He said, "This is the man who took her from you 1 year ago to the minute."
Can we have her back?
And then the phone went dead.
What happened? It was him.
The Yeagers were devastated.
Oh, no.
What did he say?
The call was so short, a successful trace was unlikely.
It was him.
Another call, if it should come, would be the only link to their little girl.
Hello?
I was so relieved. I was so relieved. But my mind was spinning, what's going to happen, what can I say? And so in the beginning, I sort of gave the lead to him in the conversation. He had this need to let me know that he was the one who was in control.
I have Susie. She's doing great.
The kidnapper boasted he was too smart to get caught.
Why did you...
He said he and Susie had been traveling together.
We've been going all over the place, having a great time. People think we're family.
Where is she right now?
Marietta wanted proof that her daughter was alive.
Ma'am,
she wanted to talk to Susie.
Fine. You don't need to worry. Like I said,
the kidnapper said the girl was nearby, sleeping in his cabin.
She hasn't had a hair.
By this time, I knew that my husband had notified the FBI. They were trying to trace the call. So I knew it was important to keep him on the phone. I wanted the FBI to get to him before he got away and find out, you know, if I was going to get my little girl back again.
And I will do whatever it takes.
As she talked, Marietta Yeager began to take control of the conversation. She said she had been praying for him.
Don't pray for me at all.
She said she felt sorry for him.
Is she really still alive?
Her strength and compassion wore the caller down, according to FBI profiler Patrick Mullaney.
To be able to contain herself over an hour with the person that she viewed as having her child was beyond belief. The caller initially starting with the typical psychopathic challenge, I am the one that kidnapped your child 1 year ago to the minute this day. To turn him from that point where he's really sticking it to her to where at the end of the hour that caller could not hang up the phone, and when he ultimately did hang up the phone, he was sobbing, crying.
I just came up with anything I could.
Agents responded to the Yeager home, hoping the call would finally lead them to the kidnapper. At the time, long-distance calls passed through a series of relay stations.
You gotta keep me informed.
Telephone personnel traced the call as far as Sarasota, Florida. But a system failure there prevented further tracing. Agents had to tell the Yeagers it didn't work.
Seems to be a problem with the trace. Yeah, let me know.
All I could think of was that he had said Susie was asleep in his cabin and we'd lost the chance to find her.
Then, a month later, a rancher in Montana showed investigators where somebody tapped into his telephone line. His phone bill showed a call to the Yeagers in Michigan that he hadn't made.
This area here?
Under the lines, he had noticed fresh tire tracks that did not match his truck tires. When asked for names of people who knew the ranch well, the rancher said David Masterson used to work for him. The investigators recalled Masterson had been a communications specialist in the Marines and would know how to tap the lines. Agents looked into a new technology, voice print analysis. A person's voice is made unique by their body's physical makeup, and scientists had begun charting voice patterns using a sound spectrograph. The voice print experts compared the anniversary call recording to a recording of an interview with Masterson. They reported a match.
How you guys doing today?
Investigators confronted Masterson with the voice print analysis.
Stop by and say hello, see how you're doing. I want you to take a look at this.
They explained the results indicated he had very likely made the anniversary call to the Yeagers. Masterson told Special Agent Pete Dunbar he was unimpressed.
And he said, oh, shoot, you know, I've got relatives whose voices sound just exactly like mine. So we asked who they were.
To begin with, I want
Investigators put together a voice lineup consisting of Masterson and the relatives he named.
Ready?
From the ranch where the anniversary call was made, they telephoned the Yeagers.
Yes, it's Marietta. Hi, Pete. Yeah, we're ready.
Each speaker identified himself by a number and read an excerpt of the anniversary call.
I'm number 1. Is this Susie's mom? We went to Lakeside Park in the Southern California Zoo.
I'm number 2.
Is this Susie's mom? We went to Lakeside Park in the Southern California Zoo.
As soon as I heard the second one, I knew that that was the voice that I had heard. You know, that was indelibly etched in my memory. I would not forget that voice.
It was more circumstantial evidence, but still nothing concrete.
Yes. Hello, Mrs. Yeager.
Investigators wanted a confession.
Yes.
We came up with the notion that the only thing that would bring him off target and motivate him to do something that might betray himself ultimately was to put him into a direct confrontation with Marietta Yeager. We requested Marietta Yeager fly all the way back out into the Bozeman area, an area which had nothing but dark memories.
Marietta had always believed that she and Susie's kidnapper would meet.
I felt this must be the opportunity. So I was very grateful for the opportunity to come out and say to him face to face and not just to a voice on the phone that I had forgiven him.
She's an extremely strong person, very different from any victim's mother that I know. And her forgiveness, well, frankly, I think is very much different. Very much different. I know she feels strong about it, and I'm not sure I agree with her.
On the morning of September 12, 1974, Marietta Yeager and David Masterson met at his attorney's office.
Something in the depth of me knew that this was the man. And when I looked into his face, I could tell by his eyes that he was a mentally ill man.
Unwavering, Marietta told him she knew he had taken Susie. Masterson insisted he was innocent. They spoke for more than an hour, Marietta trying to get him to admit what he had done, but he never cracked.
Finally, the attorney said, well, I think this is enough. We've given it a fair shot. And so we stood up and he shook hands with me. But it took all the discipline I had to let go. He was the one. I knew he was the one, and I didn't want him out of my sight.
We'll be right back, Miss Yeager. I'm sorry, I'll be right back.
To keep the pressure on Masterson, Gallatin County deputies put him under 24-hour surveillance. They made no effort to hide the fact that they were watching. The surveillance seemed to amuse him. But on September 24th, the suspect slipped away, according to Deputy Don Houghton.
The team of officers that watched him go into his house, but he didn't come out the following morning. It got to the point that we actually went and knocked on the door, somebody did, and nobody home. We started looking everywhere we knew David frequented, went to his job sites, and there was no David.
While authorities were searching for Masterson, a man called the Yeagers. It was exactly 1 year after the kidnapper had called the first time when Marietta was out. The caller identified himself as Mr. Travis.
Stop playing games with us, David.
But as soon as he got on the phone, I knew it was his voice. What he was trying to convince me and the FBI that the real kidnapper was somebody in Salt Lake City, Utah, and not this person, David, who's being considered as a prime suspect here in Montana.
He said he could prove that Susie was alive by putting her on the telephone.
Your daughter's okay? Well, then listen to this.
He's a nice man, Mommy. We are having fun together. He takes me lots of places.
Well, I knew it wasn't Susie's voice. Susie never called me Mommy. She always called me Mama. Then my fear was that he'd bribed a child to speak those words, and that in his sick mind, this child would become Susie, and that he would harm this child too.
David, that's
When Marietta kept calling him David, he began to unravel.
My name was Travis.
He blurted out information Marietta discussed with Masterson in Montana.
Yeah,
Things only David would know.
I can prove that I have her.
And so he totally incriminated himself. And when he realized what he did, he said, "You'll never see your little girl alive again." And he slammed down the phone.
Marietta called the FBI. And authorities traced the call to a Salt Lake City motel room, more than 400 miles from Masterson's home. But by the time they arrived, he was gone. After David Masterson eluded surveillance, investigators believed he called Marietta Yeager. Marietta heard a young girl's voice, but she knew it wasn't Susie.
I know my own daughter's voice.
Gallatin County Prosecutor Thomas Olson, who had been hoping for more evidence before an arrest, feared Masterson was more dangerous than ever.
I was in a state of panic. I immediately assumed he had taken another child. And we knew he had to act. We couldn't wait any longer.
When Masterson came back into town, they decided to make the arrest and hoped to find more evidence against him later. He offered no resistance. He had already hired one of the area's top attorneys. Among his personal effects, they discovered stationery from the Salt Lake City motel where the latest call originated, with the name Travis written on it. Authorities executed a search warrant created with the help of FBI profilers, according to Deputy Don Houghton.
They told us that the suspect in this kind of a crime or these kind of crimes would probably keep souvenirs or trophies of his victims, to include everything from jewelry, clothing, to body parts. Our search warrant listed all those items.
Inside the freezer, deputies made a grisly discovery. Packages wrapped in butcher's paper, marked with the initials of the murdered woman, Sandra Marie Smulligan. Then, they found a human hand with 2 severed fingers clutched in its palm. They discussed the evidence with Masterson's attorney, who announced his client had a shocking confession.
The attorney says that David's going to admit to 4 murders, and that hit me like a sledgehammer.
Masterson told them about the 4 killings. They began in 1967. He was a high school senior when he committed the first one. A fellow student had picked a fight with him. One day he spotted the student's brother fishing with a friend. He killed the student's brother for revenge.
Why the Boy Scout? What did he do?
Masterson said his second murder was when he killed the Boy Scout at the Headwaters campground in 1968.
Kick me out.
He did it to embarrass the local troop that had terminated his participation with the Scouts. His third victim was Susie Yeager. He waited until he thought everyone was asleep. He said he took Susie to the Horseshoe Hills Ranch, where they had found Sandra Smulligan's bones. He strangled her, dismembered her body, and scattered her remains.
Anything special stand out? Just somebody else?
Everyone wanted to know why.
Don't like it, or
Masterson had no answer.
just upset?
He also confessed to killing Sandra Smulligan. After she refused to see him again, he broke into her apartment.
Sandra, I want you to keep your mouth shut. Listen to me. Keep your mouth shut. Don't move. You'll be all right.
His plan was to abduct her. But when he covered her mouth with duct tape, he inadvertently covered her nose, too.
If you don't move, it'll all be over here.
As he packed her clothes, Sandra Smulligan suffocated.
Sandra.
At the same ranch, he dismembered her body, then incinerated the remains over a fire of cedar shingles and spread her bones among Susie's.
It was late. I mean, I think it was like 3 a.m. And my lasting vision of David was that as he confessed to 4 murders, he seemed to shrink smaller and smaller in stature and size. And so at the end, he was a shell of a person.
Thanks,
Deputies returned him to jail, but he never made it to trial. Although prosecutors told them they would not seek the death penalty, David Masterson hanged himself with a towel hours after he confessed. Decades before 9/11, the United States is attacked by terrorists. American businesses are bombed. Innocent people are slaughtered. Symbols of liberty become targets for destruction. The terrorists are mobile, well-organized, and deadly. As the violence escalates, their victims have but one hope: the FBI.
In the 1970s, cities across the United States became a battleground for vicious Croatian radicals. Their violent agenda targeted their own people living in America. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents all over the country worked to unravel a complex web of extortions, bombings, and assassinations. At stake were the lives of innocent Croatian families trying to build a new life in America.
New York City, 1977. On the morning of June 14th, 3 men approached the Yugoslav diplomatic mission to the United Nations. Outside the mission, a New York City police officer stands guard. Inside, Yugoslav security agents protect the embassy. One of them asks the visitors for identification.
Upstairs, go, go!
Hearing the shot, police officers rush into the building. Foreign missions are technically outside the NYPD's jurisdiction. The officers are now in Yugoslav territory. As backup arrives, the officers inside the mission try to negotiate with the 3 men, but they have barricaded themselves in an upper office. The intruders warn they have taken a woman hostage. They will kill her if anyone tries to enter. One officer offers himself as a substitute hostage.
Take me for the hostage.
The gunmen refuse. Agents from the FBI's New York field office respond to the scene. According to federal law, the FBI is responsible for investigating all attacks on foreign missions. Special Agent Len Cross.
As I arrived, we had police officers in the park. We had police officers on surrounding buildings with scoped rifles. And then we had the emergency service units making entry into the building. What was going through my mind was, what was happening on the inside.
The suspects appear in an upstairs window, brandishing a Croatian flag. They toss propaganda leaflets into the street. The leaflets call on the United Nations to force communist Yugoslavia to grant Croatia its independence.
What they were trying to do was gain publicity for their cause and showing the oppressive regime that existed in Yugoslavia and how they were oppressing the Croatian people.
A hostage negotiator talks to the suspects for nearly 2 hours. They finally agree to come out, but only if they are taken into custody by U.S. authorities, not Yugoslav officials.
They were just trying to protect themselves from the officials because they knew if they got their hands on them, they'd kill them.
Easy.
And then finally, when they realized it was the New York City police, the FBI on the other side of the door, and assured them that no harm would come to them, they surrendered without incident.
Move! Stay right there.
The suspects revealed that they never had a hostage. They were only bluffing to prevent Yugoslav security agents from mounting an armed assault. As the police officers escort the suspects out of the building, Mission Security confronts them.
Step aside, gentlemen. No, the prisoners.
They tell the officers to hand over the radicals.
This is Yugoslavian mission. You have no right here. This is territory of Yugoslavia.
Put the guns down.
The NYPD officers refuse.
Step aside.
No.
Lower your
They
weapon.
intend to leave the mission with the prisoners.
We're taking our prisoners out. Lower the guns.
The security agents finally back down. The invasion of a foreign mission on U.S. soil is unprecedented. One of their employees has been seriously wounded. Special Agent Cross now leads the investigation. He searches for a possible motive for the attack. He starts by analyzing the long history of hatred and violence between Yugoslav Serbs and Croatians as they fought over the same Eastern European lands.
The reasons and motives stretched centuries, where Serbians would go into Croatian villages and kill every man, woman, and child, and the Croatians would reciprocate.
1971. The violence spread outside Yugoslavia. Croatian radicals assassinated the Yugoslav ambassador to Sweden. In 1972, they hijacked a Swedish airliner and forced the government to release 7 political prisoners from jail. Later that same year, Croatian terrorists claimed responsibility for planting a bomb on board a Yugoslav airliner. The blast killed 26 innocent people.
I mean, the hatred was so deep and it was hard to fathom. We were dealing also with trying to understand cultural and historical issues. And it was not your simple criminal matter. There was a lot of payback on both sides.
Now, that payback is spread from Europe to the United States. It's a terrifying trend. Cross contacts fellow FBI agents at U.S. embassies around the world. They confirm that there has been a disturbing increase in Croatian attacks on Yugoslav embassies and diplomats worldwide. Special Agent Cross works closely with police and prosecutors, providing background information on the men who attacked the Yugoslav mission. 4 months later, on October 13th, a New York jury finds all 3 men guilty of conspiring to take hostage Yugoslavia's ambassador to the United Nations. The jury also convicts the gunman who wounded the Yugoslav security agent of assault with a deadly weapon. For Agent Cross, the case is officially closed. But everything he has learned tells him that Croatian terrorism in the United States is on the rise and about to explode. 9 months later, in Chicago, Cross's fears become a grim reality. Croatian businessmen begin calling the FBI in a panic. They have each received an anonymous letter written in Serbo-Croatian. The letters demand a large sum of money and threatens horrific consequences if the recipient fails to pay up. Special Agent Bjarne Borison of the FBI's Chicago field office examines the letters.
Yesterday.
Borison speaks fluent Serbo-Croatian and has a background in counterintelligence.
They said, "You are not doing your part in our cause to overthrow the communist government. We've assessed your situation and decided that you are capable of paying this amount of money." And they would instruct them to send this money to an address in Paraguay And if you fail to do that, you'll pay the consequences. It's absolute extortion. That's the way the FBI looked at it, was, yeah, this was an extortion attempt, and they were threatening your well-being if you didn't cooperate.
Agents are unsure whether the culprits are Serb spies or Croatian criminals. But they do know the extortionists have cast a wide net. Nationwide, the FBI collects a total of 52 extortion letters from Croatian businessmen. The letters are nearly identical, but with one key exception. The senders demand a different amount of money from each victim.
Most of the people who received those extortion letters were well off, or at least comfortable individuals, and had the ability to pay that money that was requested.
In New York City, Special Agent Len Cross heads the investigation into the extortion letters. Searching for leads, he contacts Pero Vučas, a prominent Croatian political writer living in Queens.
He was known to be against violence, and we felt that he might be an individual who could perhaps assist us in terms of identifying who may be responsible for these letters.
Agent Cross asks Vučas if he thinks the extortionists could be fellow Croatians.
He did not feel any good Croatian would have written these letters and made the demands that were made in these letters.
Instead, Vučas blames the Serb government of Yugoslavia.
He told me that it was his belief that these letters were generated by the Yugoslavian intelligence service to try to disrupt the Croatian community.
The majority were peaceful, and they wanted to overthrow the Yugoslav government, but by peaceful means. But there was always those who wanted to use more violent means and would do anything to achieve that goal.
Vučas believes the letters are an attempt by Serbian spies to sabotage Croatian demands for freedom.
I left him my card, told him if he could think of anything else, please just to give me a call, and we would appreciate it.
In Chicago, Agent Borison focuses on the letter's demand to send money to a post office box in the South American country of Paraguay.
The address in Paraguay was of key significance to us because somebody had to collect that money, so you had to zero in on who that might be.
The FBI sends an agent from the U.S. Embassy in Argentina to Paraguay to investigate. The agent observes a man receiving the money. He is later identified as a known Croatian terrorist who in 1972 had shot the Yugoslav ambassador to Sweden. A month later, in New York City, the case takes a dramatic turn. A man calls local news stations claiming 2 bombs have been planted in New York City. One at the United Nations, the other at Grand Central Station. In 1978, the FBI investigates a group of Croatian terrorists who use extortion to fund their cause. In New York, 2 local television stations receive a call from a man who claims 2 bombs have been planted in New York City. One is at the United Nations. Outside a library at the UN compound, a police officer finds a suspicious-looking bag. The officer immediately calls in the NYPD bomb squad. Investigators find a note nearby written in Serbo-Croatian. It demands Croatian independence and says, quote, "This is the beginning. Our decision is kamikaze." Bomb technicians carefully dismantle the device. It's armed with dynamite and a blasting cap. The timer is set to explode within the hour.
It was designed to go off, it's just that it malfunctioned.
At Grand Central Station, police find the second bomb stashed inside a locker. Again, the device is accompanied by a letter demanding Croatian independence. If either of the devices had detonated, the loss of life and property would have been disastrous.
The writing was on the wall. Things are becoming more and more violent, and they were happening more frequently.
The FBI believes it's only a matter of time before someone is killed.
Gentlemen, go ahead, have a seat, get comfortable.
So, with
Agents from the New York field office combined forces.
We felt that it would be a good idea to bring all the case agents together on one squad under one supervisor where we could exchange and coordinate our activities.
Special Agent Cross also proposes the coordination of a nationwide effort.
If we did not, my prediction was that all hell was going to break loose.
2 weeks later, in a wealthy suburb of New York, a successful businessman is gunned down outside his own home. His only crime: he's a Croatian immigrant who refused to submit to extortion. The FBI's worst fears have been realized. An extortion target has been murdered, and agents have no viable leads. In Chicago, Special Agent Bjorn Borison becomes concerned that Croatian Americans in his area will also be targeted.
It wasn't an empty threat they made in that extortion letter. They meant it. And we didn't know who they'd come after, so we had to contact all those individuals who'd received those letters to warn them and advise them they could be a possible target, and at the same time try to identify who's responsible.
The FBI also alerts other law enforcement agencies to watch for anyone purchasing illegal weapons or bomb-making materials. A few days later, the Chicago field office receives a call from the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. A known Croatian radical is trying to buy dynamite.
And they had just got an individual in a sting operation who had purchased 2 cases of dynamite from them. This individual met with the ATF undercover agents thinking he was buying real dynamite, but they actually sold him dummy dynamite.
The buyer's name is Ivo Afinic. He is a high-ranking member of a Croatian independence group called Otpor.
Obviously, they have plans to do a lot more bombings, and that's why they were buying this. The name of the organization is Hrvatski Narodni Otpor, which means Croatian National Resistance, so the word Otpor means resistance.
While the majority of Otpor members are law-abiding citizens, the FBI suspects that there may be a criminal faction operating within the organization intent on extorting and murdering fellow Croatians.
All right, guys, we're gonna pop this door. We're gonna go in. We got some
Otpor meets at a Croatian social club on the south side of Chicago. In a joint operation, FBI and ATF agents raid the club, searching for bomb-making materials. Investigators find the 2 cases of fake dynamite. But there are no live explosives anywhere in the club. A thorough search fails to turn up enough evidence to press charges against Ivo Afinic. That same day, in a nearby Chicago neighborhood, Daniel Nikolic opens up his shop. Nikolic is one of dozens of Croatian-American businessmen who have received an extortion letter. The cabinet maker refused to be bullied. Chicago police, the Chicago Fire Department, ATF agents, and the FBI investigate.
We did a search of the premises, and we determined that a bomb had been detonated on the roof of the cabinet shop.
Special Agent Borison interviews Daniel Nikolic.
There was no doubt who he thought was responsible, and that was the Otpor leadership, as a result of his failure to pay the extortion letter that he received.
With Nikolic's help, the FBI talks to members of the Croatian community. Their top priority is to find a confidential informant inside Otpor, familiar with the organization's violent activities.
leaders in the Croatian Cultural Center.
The key to almost any investigation is you have to develop someone inside the organization who's willing to cooperate with you.
But the Chicago FBI has trouble finding anyone who will talk about Otpor.
About the Serbian activity.
To get someone that was actually inside the group is very hard, because it wasn't that big a group who was actually responsible for the violence. It was a small group, and it's very difficult to find someone inside that small group who's going to cooperate with you.
While agents try to recruit an informant in Chicago, Pasadena, California becomes the group's next target. On the morning of November 22nd, 1965, 2 a Croatian businessman steps outside his home and into the gun sights of an assassin. The victim had received an extortion letter 5 months earlier, but he refused to support the Otpor cause. Local police and the FBI investigate, but they find little evidence. In San Francisco, home to a large Croatian-American population, agents mount an all-out effort to penetrate Otpor before they kill again. The FBI assigns Special Agent Bob Gorth, who speaks fluent Serbo-Croatian, to the full-time task of recruiting a confidential informant.
The FBI was having a problem with penetrating the Croatian community for the same reason that you have trouble in any ethnic terrorist field. The criminal act is a result of their nationalism. Whether or not they're involved, they will stand together as a community against law enforcement.
With a background in Yugoslavian counterintelligence, Special Agent Gorth understands the bitter conflict between the Croatians and the Serbs.
Not as often as I...
Yugoslavia was an artificial country. It was born after World War I. The Croatians fundamentally were constantly fighting to get out from under what they considered Serb domination.
His understanding of the culture helps him enter San Francisco's Croatian community.
I was very un-bureau in a way. No suit and tie, no anything. A lot of times conversations were over a beer, over a bar table. We had to find a way to break down the wall and to convince someone on the inside who had information that what they were doing was morally wrong. It had to be a matter of conscience and a matter of actual conversion of thought.
From San Francisco to Chicago to New York, FBI agents compare notes, trying to find an insider who can give them any information on the mysterious, tight-knit terror group. The FBI's lead case agent in New York is Len Cross.
It was about 6 o'clock at night, and we were going over our leads and trying to get an idea, what do we need to do next? And I received a phone call.
Agent Cross, it's for you. He wouldn't say. It sounded urgent.
After 4 months of silence, Pero Vučas, the Croatian activist writer, is desperate to talk to Cross.
You got a what?
He says, I need to talk to you, and I need to talk to you now. I got a threatening letter, and he says, I'm going to tell you everything. I know who's all responsible.
The call may be the break the FBI needs.
So I says, okay, I'm coming right over. I says, I'll meet you right at your house.
As soon as I can. All right, this evening, thank you. Okay, all right. Got a threatening letter?
Other agents from the New York field office accompany Cross to the meeting.
They says, no, you're not going, we're going to go with you, because I mean, this could be a setup. They could be trying to get you.
Nationwide, FBI agents try to infiltrate a deadly terrorist organization that extorts and murders their fellow Croatian immigrants. Pero Vučas, a Croatian political writer, asks Special Agent Len Cross to come to his house. He's finally willing to talk.
He was very concerned, very scared, and he proceeded to show me this letter. It was essentially telling him that if he didn't shut up and didn't get his act together, that something very bad was going to happen to him. He realized at this point that these guys meant business and that he was in their crosshairs, and that his only alternative was to reach out to the FBI, put his trust in them, that they can get the job done.
The writer tells Agent Cross that he believes members of Otpor are behind the letters and the violence.
And he says they're criminals, so just a bunch of criminals that have infiltrated the Croatian organizations. At that point, he laid it out who all the key players were throughout the country. He couldn't tell us who wrote their letters, but what he did tell us is these are the guys that are running the whole operation.
According to Vučas, Otpor's North American headquarters is in Chicago. Some of the key terrorists live in the Midwestern United States.
It was really good information and definitely kind of was starting to fill in the puzzle.
In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, agents contact a Croatian priest who the FBI learns is influential throughout the Midwestern Croatian community.
Sit down, please.
Father Bradish is an outspoken opponent of violence. Agents believe he may provide valuable leads. An FBI agent from the Milwaukee field office interviews him at the Catholic elementary school where he works.
People in the parish,
As they talk, Father Bradish opens his mail.
question because no indication.
One package contains a book.
From the parish.
The agent spots a wire.
He observed batteries, wires, and explosives. The agent, being concerned for the location, that it was in an elementary school with young kids, grabbed the book and he ran outside.
The Milwaukee police sends a bomb technician to disable the device. Tragically, the blasting cap explodes, taking off part of the technician's hand. The FBI issues a warning to the 52 extortion victims that they've identified across the country. Beware of book-sized packages wrapped in brown paper. The next day, in Queens, New York, Pero Vuchas picks up his mail. Inside his post office box, he finds a note telling him that he has a package. The postal worker can't find it.
No, please. Would you look one more time? It has to be here.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
The package has been stored on a shelf near the counter.
There you go. Which package right there?
It looks like a book.
I don't want it. I'll come back for it later.
Vuchas contacts Special Agent Len Cross.
I received a call telling me I've got a bomb. It's at the post office. He says, you want me to go get it? I says, no, leave it there. I says, we're going to get the bomb squad. We'll take it from there.
At the FBI lab, a bomb expert studies the package. It is nearly identical to a device sent to Milwaukee.
This book bomb was very similar in construction. The cutout looked the same. The firing system was the same. It was the same type of dynamite, same type of blasting cap.
The postmarks on the packaging reveal that both bombs were mailed from Akron, Ohio, on the same day. Agents alert Ohio authorities of the likelihood that the bomb maker lives in their area. In Cleveland, police search the home of Pavel Chotoras. The Croatian radical is their chief suspect in the bombing of a Croatian bookstore 5 days earlier.
Spread it out a little bit.
Special Agent Bjarne Borison.
During the search, they found a book that was hollowed out and was obviously a book bomb.
The bomb is a prototype. Once again, there are no live explosives on the premises. Without further evidence, no arrest can be made. Investigators try to link the prototype to the book bombs mailed to Milwaukee and Queens.
Every bomb maker has his own unique style. And of course, one of the reasons for doing that is safety. You want to do it the same way every time, because if you've changed anything, it's very dangerous to wire a book bomb.
In the lab, Special Agent Denny Klein compares all three devices. Each book is hollowed out to the same depth. The glue and solder used to construct the devices each have the same chemical composition. Even minute tool marks on the bomb's wiring match.
The belief of the laboratory was that this was a prototype that was used to make the two earlier bombs.
There is no way to know how many more bombs have been constructed from the prototype. March 17th, 1980. New Yorkers and tourists pack Fifth Avenue to watch the city's annual St. Patrick's Day parade. 10:55 a.m. A bomb explodes at the 30th floor office of a Yugoslav bank. FBI agents respond, including Special Agent Ken Maxwell.
We were doing interviews of the employees of the bank, the employees of the neighboring offices, the maintenance people in the building, delivery people, anybody who would even come remotely close to 505th Avenue that day.
The only significant evidence agents find is another note in which Oatpork claims responsibility. The terrorists issue a chilling threat. The bomb attacks will continue until Croatia is free. On June 3rd, 1980, the terrorists target one of America's most cherished symbols of freedom, the Statue of Liberty. On June 3rd, 1980, Croatian terrorists target one of America's most cherished symbols of freedom, the Statue of Liberty. Special Agent Ken Maxwell helps investigate the bombing.
Someone had gotten into what they call the museum story room at the base of the statue that tells you the whole history of how the statue was built and all of the wonderful history in the pictures, and plus the souvenir shop. All of that had been blown to smithereens. A considerable amount of damage had been done throughout the base of the statue.
A number of violent groups claim responsibility for the bombing, including the Palestinian Liberation Organization, anti-Castro Cubans, and even neo-Nazis.
Multiple claims of credit back in the early 80s was not an unusual phenomenon.
Investigators painstakingly search for pieces of the bomb, expecting that the evidence will help them determine which group is responsible.
Hey guys, looks like I got a wire over here.
We spent all night there sifting through all of the rubble and debris and came up with quite a few components. The components of the improvised explosive device were strikingly similar to previous Croatian-related bombings.
What began as an attempt to extort dozens of Croatian Americans has escalated into a campaign of violence.
The Statue of Liberty was the greatest symbol of attraction for potential terrorists because of what it stood for. In their mind, the United States was not listening to their cause. So let's bring the cause to their attention and let's show them, the United States, that this is a real issue to us, and almost trying to extort the United States of America to help them achieve independence.
But the terrorists' logic is flawed. The attack only fuels authorities to intensify their investigation.
Nice. Bombing our Statue of Liberty, it's a slap in the face. So what we did, we started to focus our resources, our investigative attention on several individuals who we strongly suspected were involved in this kind of activity.
In New York, the FBI sets up intensive surveillance on several key terror suspects. In San Francisco, FBI Special Agent Bob Gorth continues his efforts to recruit an informant inside the terrorist ring.
I spent over a year doing nothing but contacting Croatians. It's very important to understand the people, to speak their language, to understand where they come from, even to a degree to empathize with them, so that you can talk to them in terms that they understand and appreciate. I interviewed over 300, I think, of all stripes and persuasions and types, trying to find the right source. I finally found a man who indicated he'd like to talk again. Hadn't told me anything, but he'd like to talk again. After talking to him, I don't know how many times, we began to build a rapport. And finally he said, I think I'll help.
Finding a source of information inside Otpor is a major break for the FBI. After thoroughly debriefing the informant in San Francisco, the FBI sends him to New York to gather intelligence on the most recent Croatian bombings.
He originally had lived in New York, and he was well acquainted with the people.
The informant renews old friendships with Croatian radicals.
He would have been killed if members of Otpor Command had found out that he was the man.
Despite the risk, he probes for details about their plans.
If you could obtain inside information on what's going on in a criminal enterprise, it means a tremendous amount in terms of achieving success in an investigation.
the informant learns that the group intends to assassinate an outspoken critic of Otpor.
Take care of it.
The target is Pero Vučas, the prominent Croatian political writer.
They were going to kill him with a rifle as he was walking his 6-year-old daughter to school in the morning. If they missed, they could hit his 6-year-old daughter. They had no concern for her, and most of the agents and the detectives working this case, they all had kids. So, you know, they're thinking in terms of a father. How could they do such a thing like this?
According to the informant, the ruthless plot is already in motion. Special Agent Ken Maxwell watches as 2 suspected terrorists park a van near the target's home.
What was very unusual is that they got out of the front of the van and went in the back of the van and removed one of the rear windows and substituted one of the windows with a cardboard panel. And although we could not see totally inside the van, we did know they weren't having a bagel and coffee in the back of that van. They were looking to assassinate him.
In New York, agents believe Croatian assassins intend to shoot Pero Vučas as he walks his 6-year-old daughter to school. Vučas has been working with the FBI to identify the terrorists. Special Agent Len Cross warns Vučas to stay inside his apartment.
If they had made an attempt to get out of the car and proceed to his residence, then we saw what would appear to be a weapon. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. They were going to be taken down, period.
Fortunately, Vučas and his daughter remain hidden, forcing the snipers to abandon their deadly plot. The FBI decides to set up electronic surveillance on a man they believe to be the mastermind behind the East Coast bombings, the president of Otpor, Stjepan Sačić.
He was directing the operations here in New York, and naturally would be the place to put the wiretap, especially in view of the fact that the individuals came to him, and that's where they had their meetings.
Special Agent Bjarne Borisson.
It's very difficult to go into a building and place a wire without leaving any trace that you were there, and the FBI is quite good at that.
What are they talking about?
Very nearby, we set up a listening post, and we'd have at least one translator there at all times.
Their job is to translate Croatian to English,
The pieces are the bomb making.
as well as identify each voice on the tape. They must also decipher any code words used by the terrorists.
They won't come out and say words like dynamite. They may say things or pieces.
The drop-off, which is the device delivery, and the package is the bomb.
It took a while for us to get a grasp as to what are they talking about and get the significance of the phraseology they used.
The conspirators meet often, usually in the rec room in Sačić's basement. Jako Drevan, one of the men who tried to assassinate Pero Vučas, is Sačić's lieutenant. Translators work day and night, analyzing their conversations.
The wiretap would run 24 hours a day, and we had to constantly monitor the conversations because they're talking about bombing, assassinating people.
Agents are still trying to pin down specifics, places, dates, the identities of the co-conspirators.
It was all part of the puzzle that had all the pieces be pulled together in order to form enough evidence to start the prosecution.
Under federal racketeering laws, the FBI needs hard evidence of a conspiracy to take down the entire organization. Special Agent Ken Maxwell.
One particular night, their shaking of the pinball machine shook loose a wire that was used in the installation of the microphone.
It looked like a plain wire. It didn't look like it had a head that a normal microphone would have. So if you saw it, you might even know what it is.
On the other end, the translators can hear the conspirators talking about the wire.
What they were saying was, what is that? And one of them realized rather quickly, because he had done all of the electrical work for the house, I didn't put that wire there.
They knew there was something there that didn't belong there. Now the next question is, do they know what it is?
The conspirators begin following the wire.
And they traced that wire out of the basement to the power source out on the street and ripped the wire out.
For the FBI, the tap is critical.
To the great credit of our special operations folks, they reinstalled, and they reinstalled within 24 hours. I think the bad guys thought they had won in that instance, not realizing our persistence. And this time, we avoided the pinball machine.
Agents hear Stepan Sacic and Jako Dreven planning an upcoming operation.
They were talking about, let's get ready, I want you to do this, I want you to smash this. And we knew they were getting ready to bomb something.
Agents learn that Otpor intends to bomb a Yugoslav dance studio, scheduled to host a gala attended by the Yugoslav ambassador to the United Nations. Special Agent Len Cross.
They were going to have over 300 people there. At this point, this really raised our concerns because now they're going after groups and not concerned about who gets hurt.
Agents tail Dreven. He drives to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where he visits the home of a man named Vuka Ulic.
When he went into the residence, he went in empty-handed. When he came out, he had a good-sized brown bag, and there seemed to be some bulky stuff inside the bag.
Agents follow Dreven back to New York City, where he picks up another Otpor foot soldier. The men drive on toward their target.
And they circled a block in Manhattan and kept circling it and circling it.
Agents watch as Dreven cases the building. He leaves the suspicious bag behind in the van.
It was decided that if they removed the bag, then we were going to arrest them. Certainly we were not going to take the chance of a potential bombing in Midtown Manhattan.
As the suspect returns to the van, the agents watch his every move, ready to take the terrorists down. In New York, agents tail two suspected Croatian terrorists. An FBI surveillance operation has revealed that a radical faction of Otpor is planning to place a bomb at a reception for 300 people. The terrorists case the building and then leave the area. Agents suspect that they have a bomb in their van. The FBI cannot risk a terror attack on hundreds of innocent people. Agents obtain search warrants to raid the homes of Stepan Sacic and Jako Dreven.
FBI! Up against the wall! Hold it! Hold it right there! Get out! Hold it right there! Hold it right there! Hold it right there! Come on! We have warrant for your arrest. What is this? I don't understand. Just hold it right there. Hold it.
In Dreven's home, Special Agent Ken Maxwell finds a familiar-looking bag in a closet.
When I looked into the shopping bag, I saw a woman's pocketbook that was open. And inside the pocketbook were sticks of dynamite wrapped up in tape, a timing device, an alarm clock, an electric blasting cap, and wire. It's not every day that you find a bomb at your feet.
Authorities take Dreven into custody. Across town, Special Agent Len Cross and his team search the home of Stepan Sacic, the president of Otpor.
One of my team members was going through pile of paint drop cloths. And he found the scoped rifle, and he found the ammunition.
Investigators suspect Sacic's co-conspirators used the rifle weeks earlier in a plot to murder political writer and FBI cooperator Pero Vučas. Agents arrest Sacic for conspiracy under RICO, the federal racketeering statute.
He was advised of his rights, and he refused. He wasn't being very cooperative.
No, I don't think so.
4 days later, FBI agents and police raid the Bridgeport, Connecticut home of Vuka Julic.
Towards the window.
What is all
Face the window.
Julic provided Drevin with the bomb earmarked for the dance studio.
We have a warrant to search the premises.
A bomb tech, as he moved some clothes, observed there on the floor in a bag considerable amount of dynamite, and sitting on top of the dynamite were electric blasting caps, live electric blasting caps.
Agents arrest Vuka Julic.
Don't you worry about it. We'll take care of it from here.
Special Agent Cross. You haven't heard of him.
They call Special Agent Cross in New York to inform him they have found one of Otpur's primary bomb makers.
Special Agent Cross.
Cross again questions Stepan Sacic, asking him if he knows a man by the name of Vuka Julic.
You know a guy from Bridgeport?
He says, yeah, a little I do. I says, you got some problems. And we just arrested him. And I says, he had a large quantity of explosives and caps and weapons in his house.
Sacic still refuses to talk.
There you are.
New York investigators call in Special Agent Bob Gorth from San Francisco to question Julic. The former Otpur member turned confidential informant accompanies him.
Let's hope.
Late in the afternoon, with the moral support of the Croatian cooperator, Julic finally begins to open up.
He wanted the feeling that a fellow Croatian believed in him, trusted him, and he wouldn't be entirely alone. And when he finally got the courage up, he said, yeah, I want to talk about it. And of course, that was the linchpin of the whole case.
Vuka Julic tells investigators how other Otpur members convinced him to kill a Croatian community leader in California 2 years earlier.
After drinking all one evening and into the morning, he decided he'd strike a blow for Croatian freedom and go kill this enemy of the people. So he did. And later on, he realized that what he'd done was not advancing the Croatian cause, but really was harming it. He was one of the few people that I firmly believe regretted what he did.
Julic agrees to testify against Sacic, Drevin, and the other Croatian terrorists.
When I killed.
This is the key testimony prosecutors need to take down the entire terrorist ring.
His cooperation in this case was instrumental in breaking the back of an organized crime organization wherein in 4 cities we literally took out the godfathers of 4 families.
The RICO statute, originally enacted to stop organized crime, is used for the first time to fight terrorism. Within 2 years, 11 members of the Otpur organization are convicted and sentenced to up to 40 years in prison.
If you're going to achieve any kind of success in terrorism, you have to be able to bring to the playing field the right kind of players, the right kind of knowledge, and the right kind of resource, if you even hope to put a dent into it.
The Rambo approach is not going to win over terrorists. Terrorists are motivated by an extreme sense of nationalism. And if you're going to deal with them, you've got to get into their hearts and minds. Otherwise, you may stop them on a particular incident, but you haven't changed their minds. If you don't change their minds, they'll do it again.
For the FBI and law enforcement nationwide, dismantling Otpur was a vital achievement. Terrorists operating inside U.S. borders were stopped dead in their tracks.